An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he said to the boy. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves. One is evil. He is angry, envious, sorrowful, regretful. He has a lot of greed and arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? The old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed. The story is a metaphor for inner conflict and the idea that you can feed the good wolf by having compassion and kindness, and eventually the evil wolf will get bored and stop begging for food. 99% of people are feeding the wolf that's living in fear, anger, and resentment. 99% of people are surrounding themselves with other wolves who are living in the same way. But 1% of people are feeding the other wolf and allowing themselves to peacefully walk alongside other wolves who are also feeding this truth and light of compassion, empathy, and love. 99% of people are trying to cure their loneliness, fear, anger, and resentment by chasing after the wrong thing. And there are plenty of things out there for us to chase, which are actually distractions. But 99% of people are buying into them. Education, careers, popularity, money, houses, relationships, cars, fame, beauty, even happiness, love, and peace. Some of these things cannot be bought, but many of them can be sold. And while those things may be a byproduct to reaching our true purpose, there is much more than meets the eye. This is something that only 1% of people will ever truly understand. But before they can accept this truth, they will go on to chase these other things. They will go on to feed that other wolf. People who consume their lives on the pursuit of happiness rarely are the ones who ever truly get ahead of the pack. And let's be clear on what it means to be ahead of the pack. I can make a video called How to Get Ahead of the Pack, but what that means is how to be more successful than other people who are trying to achieve the same thing as you. And this is not what this video is about. Because to get ahead of 99% of people means that you have to do something different than what 99% of people are already doing. They're all reaching for the things as if these things represent the true meaning of life. They will say their life purpose is to make money, provide for their family, live life to the fullest, be happy, content, open a restaurant, make music, perform on Broadway, become the first university-educated person in their family. That's what 99% of people are doing. And are they further ahead than the rest of everyone else? Maybe their ego is. The answer to this lies in the title of the video. How to get ahead of 99% of people is to realize that the purpose is not to get anywhere, not to be ahead of anyone. Only 1% of the population know that the whole point of life isn't a race. There isn't anywhere to go. There isn't really anything that you have to do. The way to get ahead of 99% of people is to just be. 99% of people have no idea what it means to be in the present moment. 99% of people have no idea what it means to be a mindful human. 99% of the population are living in what is called survival mode. They're living in a constant state of struggle, comparison, and more than that, they are disconnected and lonely. They hate being alone. They feel uncomfortable being alone. Most would rather be dead than have to be alone. Most would rather stay in toxic, unhealthy relationships than be alone. Most would rather stay in toxic work environments than have to quit and go at it alone. Being alone is the most feared thing on this planet. Yet it's also what is the whole premise of how we got here. We're constantly creating problems for ourselves just to stay alive. We create problems just to stay busy. We create problems just to stay relevant. The lone wolf doesn't perceive problems the way 99% of others do. Instead, they perceive a problem as a learning opportunity to teach them how to be more present-minded. A job loss doesn't scare them as much as it would excite them to see what life had in store for them next. A divorce wouldn't cause as much grief as it would open up a new door to freedom. It takes years to land yourself in the 1% of people who are here to live out the true purpose of human existence, which is to be alone. The other thing is that you have to commit to this. You can't call yourself a lone wolf and then ask if it's okay to need social connection. You already know the truth about that. You can't call yourself a lone wolf and then ask if it's something that can be done with a partner by your side. You already know the answer to that too. It's okay if you're in a relationship or if you love hanging out with your friends. But deep down inside, you know that you love your time alone the best. And whenever you're with others, it's only a distraction from sinking into this life fully and immersing yourself into the beauty of your own existence on this planet. While you also have the ability and capacity, like no other human, to be a witness to the other humans that exist on this earth with a level of love and respect that no one else can understand. The lone wolf knows that humans are not to be interfered with. They are so beautiful on their own. And yes, we romanticize and glamorize love and relationships and become so enamored to see a couple in love. We shed a tear to watch a pair get married. Oh, they love each other so much. How beautiful. Is it? What is that though? Is that love or is that fear? Is it our own fear that worries that we will be alone and how beautiful it is that they found each other so they don't have to? Oh, to be alone in this life is such a horrible thing. That is the very first lie we were made to believe by the other people who believed it first. Because otherwise, they were living in fear of being alone. The ability to be alone and without another human is a skill that only 1% of the people know how to do. The ability to be alone while also feel so connected to every other human on the planet is something that 99% of people will never understand. This is a video for the 1%, which means that 99% of people will not keep watching this video. They've probably already given up by now. So if you can stick it out, I promise you, there will be enough value by the end that you will fully understand why being a lone wolf is the meaning of life and every human's purpose. You've all heard this quote, that doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. Whether you're forming relationship after relationship, hoping for something to fill your void, or you're sitting around alone day after day, waiting for the loneliness to lift. If you could just feel better or like being alone long enough, then one day something will change. It's not. It won't. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So let's talk a bit about loneliness, because this is an important aspect of getting ahead of 99% of others. The science behind loneliness says that feelings of loneliness can prompt changes in the brain that further isolate people from social contact. Loneliness doesn't just make people feel isolated. It alters their brain in ways that can hinder their ability to trust and connect to others. This is where the lone wolf will fall into the trap of 99% of people. 99% of people are trying to avoid loneliness by not being alone, which gets them away from their purpose as a human, which is to be alone. And not totally isolated either. If you listen to my videos in the series I did called The Loneliness Report, you'll hear me talk about how our neighborhoods need to be designed in a way that in and of themselves are less isolating and allow for a sense of community, even if you are someone who is mostly alone. It's like some of us are genetically programmed to need social human connection. Because like I said, to be without it would kill us. But it's actually not the lack of social connection that kills us as much as it is the loneliness. So the key trait here that only 1% of the population right now is able to do is to be alone and not be lonely. And this is the greatest of survival skills. I tried asking a woman that if she was on a deserted island, would she rather want a man or a bear on the island with her? And the majority of women are choosing the bear. So back to this loneliness thing. Loneliness isn't even something that is dependent on someone being alone. because we know that people can be surrounded by people all the time and still feel lonely. So what does that say? Well, for one, it really matters who you surround yourself with. And two, what matters more is that despite who you surround yourself with, you are forever with yourself. And thus, it matters how you feel about yourself more than how you feel about the quality of your social connections. Poor connection with self equals poor connection with others. Good connection with self equals connection with others is not fundamental to your happiness. You see, the one thing we are in control of is the relationship with ourselves. We can always count on the relationship with ourselves to be compassionate, understanding, reliable, trustworthy, and validating. However, what we are not in control of is the relationships with others. Maybe one day we can count on them, but the next day we cannot. Maybe one day they are compassionate, but the next day they are not. You get the point. One of the greatest benefits of spending time alone is that it can help you develop a better understanding of who you are. The better you know yourself, the more likely you are to do the things you love. The more likely you are to learn things that interest you. The more likely you are to spend time with people who you feel good around. There is a relationship between social isolation and loneliness. Both are mortality predictors. The risk of mortality to the lone wolf does not scare them. They do not live in fear. They also do not buy into the so-called risks of living as a lone wolf. Because being a lone wolf means you do not fear death. You are here to live life to the fullest. You are a risk taker. And at the end of the day, it's not going to be loneliness that's going to kill you. But it will probably be someone from the 99% that will. They will be the ones that will lead you to your demise if you are not careful. The way to get ahead of 99% of other people is to transcend the feeling of loneliness. Loneliness no longer becomes your enemy. It is your friend. You love your loneliness. Loneliness in this sense is calming, relaxing, soothing. It is enrichment, enlightenment, and enjoyable when it is transformed into aloneness. 99% of people cannot be alone without succumbing to crippling loneliness. But the other 1% have learned how to transcend this. And that is the real skill of survival for lone wolves and what sets them apart from the other 99% of people. Some of the biggest differences I see from the pack versus the lone wolf. The pack relies on others for their survival. And when others fail, they fail. The lone wolf relies on themselves for their survival. And when they fail, it's a valuable lesson for them on their path forward. The pack passes blame on others when things don't go their way. Lone wolves take responsibility for everything that happens to them. The pack thinks that things are just happening to them, whereas the lone wolf understands that things are happening for them. The pack is focused on outward appearance and image. Lone wolves are focused on inner connection and self-discovery. The pack operates from a survival state. The lone wolf operates from a mindful state. Most people in the pack will never take the first step to take a step away from the pack. Most people will believe that staying in the pack is what's going to lead them to happiness. But taking the first step, as I noted, is something that 99% of people will never do. You will never achieve your goals by standing in a pack of 99% of other people who think your goal is unattainable and unrealistic. If you started out in a pack and didn't want to be part of one, no one is keeping you there but yourself. 99% of people think that they were born into a pack that they have to remain loyal and dedicated to. They can never leave. Only 1% of the people have a different mentality, and they know that the only person they actually have to remain loyal and dedicated to is themselves. If you think you're here to live for others, you will live in a pack. If you think you are here to live for yourself, you will live as a lone wolf. And let me make this very clear to you. There is nothing wrong with living in a pack or living as a lone wolf. What is wrong is being a lone wolf who thinks they have to live in a pack. There is nothing wrong with being in the 99% of most humans, but there is something wrong with knowing you are in the 1%, spending time with 99% of the people 99% of the time. Instead of being in the 1% who spends 1% of their time with 99% of the people. And to get there requires one thing: self-acceptance, accepting that you are not like 99% of them. So don't try to be. Someone recently reached out to me for coaching, and in their application, when asked what it was they needed help with, they replied, to learn how to fit in. I had to decline their application because they have yet to understand the true nature of transformational coaching is not for this purpose. Had they said instead that they wanted to work with a coach to learn how to accept themselves, that might have gotten them into the first call with me. But we all have to start somewhere, right? Keep watching these videos. Keep tuning in and keep watching every video to the very end, because what you need to hear might be the last thing I ever say. P.S. If you're part of the 1% who watched this video to the very end, comment LWND. Lone wolves never die, because they don't. And that will be the title of my next video.